maybe let me start the recording. Could I just have a show of hands? Who has downloaded the source code for the practical, well, for the tutorial code that I've just talked about already? So on Eve, you will have noticed that there was I think some code for a tutorial that I uploaded on Eve, and that code is actually the code that we worked on Tuesday's tutorial. So we are going to go through that again today. All right, so who's gone through it? Okay, a few people, not many. Online people, anyone go through the source code that was uploaded onto Eve from Tuesday? Okay, so there are people that actually go, I haven't. All right, that's fine. All right, so for those who have gone through it, if you have any questions as we go through it, you know, this is perfect. Please present your questions, because I think it's really important that you realize that what I was actually doing on Tuesday was I was guiding the students towards an answer, but I also deliberately guided them towards, are we going to try this? Are we going to try this? So it was more of a trial by error, and then we ran out of time. So I have provided the full code on Eve, and what's really important, ladies and gentlemen, is that you realize that the code you see there is not the answer. It is one possible way of implementing it, but that's why you also need to understand how if statements really work so that you make it your own. There are obviously incorrect ways of doing it, but there's also certain approaches that you may try that will lead you towards it's almost there, but it's not quite there. And you need to know, well, why is it not there? Because during the semester test and during the exam, you might get towards that, it's not quite there, now what? And you can't put your hand up and say, can someone please help me? Because it's an assessment. You need to figure it out yourself. And so today's tutorial, the main aim is really to try and guide you towards your own version of a solution. So please don't go, I saw the code and I know what the solution is. It is a solution. It isn't even the best solution, but it is a solution that perhaps makes more sense to someone who's just starting off on the journey of making complex if statements. Right, so keep that in mind, and note again, it is not the answer. What will your version of the answer be? Okay, so before we do that, go through the actual code, because I think Mr. van der Westhuizen will probably go through the code himself. And you know what? I'm deliberately, just so you know, it's like a magic trick. So Mr. van der Westhuizen does not have access to the code. He doesn't have access to the code. I uploaded the code onto Eve. You all have access to it. He doesn't have access to that code on Eve. I haven't given it to him. When he shows you how he's going to implement this solution, I can almost guarantee that his approach is going to be different from the one you see on Eve. And that just shows that, you know, Mr. Labia mentioned, we each have our own different programming styles. He's going to give you a correct answer, but it's not going to be, again, it's not going to be the answer. Maybe it will be the answer. Mr. van der Westhuizen likes to be very optimal and very competitive. Trust me, you buy a nice computer. He comes the next day with an even better. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do step one, which is understanding the problem. Okay? Because remember, we can't start coding right away. We need to know how we're going to solve it. So we're going to start with the design. I'm going to do that now, MS Paint, because Paint is the best thing ever. So, over here, my MS Paint, and I'm going to apologize in advance because you all know that my paint skills is going to be a lot more terrible than Mr. Labia if he did any. But, you know, you'll get the gist of it. So, I would like everyone to just put in their own words. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you what I want. I'm the client, right? I'm going to tell you I need the following program to be created. And I would like you from that to try and discern what is it that your program is supposed to do. Now, I know some of you have seen the code and you do know what the program is supposed to do, but try and work with us here. Participate. Okay. So the problem is Mr. Labier is complaining that the students do not know which session to come. They also do not know when they should come physically and when they should join the practicals online. So we're going to ask you to develop a Visual Basic program that, if a user, i.e. a student, enters information onto that program, the program will tell them two things. Okay. Number one, it will tell them what time they should come, because there's 3 sessions every Friday, right? So do they come at 10 to 2? Do they come at 3:30? And then the final time, which I still have not remembered or bothered to look up yet, again, just to remind myself, that last session, when does the last session start? I have no idea. That I just said, pretend it's 5 o'clock. Okay. And we can continue to pretend it's 5 o'clock, just don't rock up at 5 o'clock for real tomorrow. But there's also some other possibilities. So it's a case of you must come one of the 3 possible times, but it also depends on, are you coming to the computer labs, or are you going to join us on Discord this week? All right, does this make sense? So I would like you all to begin with the design by starting to identify what would your inputs be and what would your outputs be. Okay, so what should your program spit back out to the user, and what do you think is necessary for a computer program to be able to tell you what is necessary information? Right, so please work on it. So online people work on it, physical people work on it. Check out paper, start scribbling down your notes. So first start with the inputs and outputs. Okay, so I see some of the online people already typing in, this is what we think. And please, try and work through this on your own, because it might not necessarily be the correct answer. Could be right, could be wrong. But the idea is you try and you give your own interpretation, and then we work through it and we try to decide, well, why did you think that? Okay, so it's the input, what must go into your computer program, and then in terms of output, what needs to come out, considering the problem that we have told you. So for a part of the design, we don't have to draw anything, so I am going to type in input is what, output is not what, output is what. And obviously inputs could be inputs and outputs could be also outputs. There might be multiple things that we need to display. Okay, so while everybody else is working on it, Essie Cullen, I hope you can hear me now. I will repeat the question. So if you can just confirm that you can hear. Okay, right. So the problem is Mr. Labier is very annoyed that students are coming to the practicals at the wrong time. and also physically to the venue on the wrong day. So he would like you to develop a Visual Basic program that if a student provides certain information, the program will then advise the student on what time they must come to the practical, and for this current week, do they come in person or do they join on Discord? Okay, so hopefully you can answer that question. Right, can I just have a show of hands who reckons that they are finished with the inputs and the outputs? Okay, just a few hands, but people are working on it. Thank you. And then online people, could you please indicate if there's anyone who feels that they are finished with the inputs and the outputs? Okay, we'll just give you a minute more so that we can, the sooner we finish the design, the sooner we can discuss and move on to the next components. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's work through this together. Right, so in terms of inputs or input, how many of you have only one input? Okay, how many of you have more than one input? Okay, so for those of you who have more than one input, how many inputs are you looking at? Yes, okay, so the general argument is 2. All right, online people, please note that I will not be able to hear you because I don't have the earphones that Mr. Labia has. So please, if you have any queries or comments, please just type them. Okay, so the online people, if you, just for your benefit, the physical people are saying that those people who reckon that there's more than one input is saying that there are 2 inputs. Okay, is there anybody online that might indicate that this is not the case? That you have multiple inputs, but you have more than 2 inputs? No feedback from the online people. Okay, well, we hope that you are alive in there. Okay, so for the people who say there are 2 inputs, what would those inputs be? So in other words, think of it this way. In order for your program to advise the student on when they should come and where they should go, technically, like online or in person, your argument, the ones who reckon there's 2, believe that 2 pieces of information is required. Okay? The first, I assume, is, and I think it's on everyone's mind, is that you need to tell the computer program which session you are in. Is that correct? Because on Eve, how many sessions are there? There are 6 different sessions, right? Okay, there's 6 different sessions. Does this make sense? 6 different sessions. And so you've got to be able to specify that it's session 1, or according to Eve, I'm session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4, session 5, session 6. One of the 6. Okay, so your one input is session number, and I'm going to specify that it's 1 to 6, just as a range, because this is the permissible values that I'm allowed. Think back to your grade 12 average calculator. What's the permissible range in terms of the input? 0 to 100. Does this make sense? Because you can't have someone who says, I got minus 20 for maths. Or, I got 102% for computer science. Right, does this make sense? So the same thing happens here with the session. You can only have 1 to 6 because nobody else has a different session. Now, the next input that you probably want to specify is what? which week it currently is. Is it week A or week B? Does this make sense? Because let's think about our own scenario right now with the practicals. Is it week A or week B this week? It's week A, isn't it? Right. It's week A. You are all supposed to be in group A for the tutorials and the lectures. That's why you're sitting here physically. And for the online people, you are obviously in group B, which is the reason why you're sitting via Blackboard at the moment. Okay. But the practicals might be different. You might be in a different, you might be sitting here now physically for your tutorials and your lectures, but for your practicals, you might be in group B, because you might have chosen a group B session. Does this make sense? Okay. So if this week is week A, and you happen to be in a week A session, do you come onto campus to attend the labs, the practicals in the labs physically, or do you join via Discord? You would come physically to the labs. Does this make sense? Online people, hopefully you're... So, the second input that I would specify is week. And this one, what are the permissible values? A or B. Does this make sense? Got it. So if I have these two pieces of information, with these two pieces of information alone, would I be able to let a student know which time they must come and whether they should come online or in person? Will this be sufficient? Okay, now I know that we have a student who indicated that there were 3 inputs. Perhaps you can share with me and the rest of the group what your third input is. But for the rest of the people who are indicating that they have 2 inputs, do you agree with these 2 inputs? For those of you who have 1 input, do you understand why the second one is required? I assume your 1 input was the session number. Okay, does this make sense still? All right, and then in terms of output, what would the output be? Obviously, what I kept saying, and that is, number 1, I need to know what time, okay? And the second thing is online or face-to-face. Does this make sense? Those are really the only 2 outputs we want. Those are the 2 inputs we need. Okay, so with that in mind, what is the next piece of information in a design that we require? Your variables. All right, so what else do we need? We need variables. We also need our interface, what it should look like. We also need an algorithm, obviously. And we did talk about test data, which is very useful. But the one thing we have not introduced to you yet in terms of a design is something called event and actions. Okay. And in a way, you have been introduced to this concept of events and actions already, because remember last week we talked about event-driven programming. Do you recall that? Who recalls that? Vaguely. Okay, 1 person, a few. Okay, but you know what I'm talking about. Online people, there's one. He's like, yes, I remember it. Okay, right. What was event-driven programming? Effectively, we had to write code that was linked to events so that when an event took place, you want that code to be executed. Does this make sense? All right. So now we need to consider the following. Just a quick question. This morning's lecture, how many events were there? When we went over the question about adding up the numbers, how many events were there? Okay, there were 2, right? 2, and then the online people were like 2. Yes, it was 2, because there were 2 button click events. Does this make sense? Okay, so can I ask like a quick question, this is like a trick question here. Do you think that buttons are the only type of events that you're going to get? So when people click on a button, that is the only event you ever have to work with. The answer is no. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about those events today. All right. But I don't think it's going to be forced or required of you yet, okay, to do your full design. So up to now, you've been working on a design. It's not really the full design. We're going to keep adding new items that you should include in your design. So by next week, hopefully you will have more of a full design that is required in the semester test and exam. All right. So what I would like you to do now is consider what your user interface looks like. And so you could scribble something out, and on top of it, I would like to ask you, well, what variables would you consider using in this? And then after that, we will discuss the algorithm. All right. And then there was a query from the online student saying, isn't the time of the practical determined by the group you're in on Eve? 1 to 6, well, it's not 16, 1 to 6. Yes, the answer is correct there. The time does depend on which session you chose. If you chose 1, you get a certain time. You use 2, a certain time. That's true. But that is not the full picture, because we also want to know, do you come here today? Do you come physically to the venue, or do you go online? And that will require the information of, is it week A or week B right now? Okay. Right, so rather than waste time, I am going to scribble a really, really bad user interface. Okay, and remember, the user interface that I scribble now is not necessarily very complete. What should happen is that when you have a user interface, you should also include the labels. All right, so in other words, this is my form. You got to say the name of this form is FRM, whatever. And if you have a text box, you must tell me what the name of the text box is. And with the text box, you want to put labels there, and you will have buttons there. All right, so one of the things you need to indicate on your form, because this is really, really important in your first semester test, which is a theory, and we are going to ask you to draw a user interface. Yes. Absolutely. We need you to indicate what the title of the form is. So give it a nice name that explains what this program does. So I'm going to say this is the practical session guide. Let's say that. And it is. It's a guide that tells you, are you going to come online or physically this week? And what time should you come? Because maybe like me, you're terrible and you don't actually know what the time of the third session is. All I know is the session ends at 7:15, and that's important for me. Obviously, you can't rock up at 7:15, because then we're going to glare at you and say, go home, you got 0. You're late. You're very late. Okay, so there's the title of the form. I'm going to create my text boxes. So there's one text box there. There's another text box there. Right, and I'm going to put a label here. So this label is going to indicate which session. And obviously this is 1 to 6. And this one here is week, is it A or B? All right, just my label tries to be informative for the user. So that, think about it this way. If you just go week ? Would your user know what to fill in? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it, because maybe you're asking me which week of the semester it is, and there's 14 weeks. Okay, this makes sense. So you tell them, listen, in this text box, fill in A or B. In this text box, put in either the values 1 to 6. Right, so I have a trick question right now. So obviously I need a text box as well, another text box. So I'm going to put in a text box. And I'm actually going to do it differently today. All right, so the version you saw online, the code I've uploaded, those of you who saw it, I had one text box for the output. And I've decided that today I am going to do it differently. I'm going to have 2 text boxes for my output. Right, so there are my 2 text boxes. And I've got my text here, time to come. And then I've got venue. Right, so in total I've got 4 text boxes. How many buttons do you think I need? Online people, physical people, how many buttons do you think are required? 1? Who thinks 1? Who thinks 2? Who thinks 3? Who thinks 4? Okay, so that's a plus. You don't think that the number of buttons is commensurate to the number of text boxes. For those of you who think we need 2 buttons, why would you think we need 2 buttons? Do we need 2 buttons? Okay, I'll tell you why I think it's only 1 button. A lot of online people say it's 1. There's one person who said there's 3 buttons. Okay, I'll tell you why we only need 1 button. Does it make sense for me to type in a value for session and then press a button and say, here, capture this? And then I type something for week A and B, and then I click another button and say, here, capture this. And then I have a 3rd button that goes, now calculate it for me. Is that necessary? When you fill in a form online, you've filled in forms online before, right? Have you ever had to type in your name and then go, save it? Initial, save it. What gender are you? And you choose and you go, save it. Have you done that? Your form doesn't do that. Why? Why not? What's wrong with doing that? How many of you would use the form? Nobody. But then tell me, what's wrong with the form? It's annoying to use, isn't it? Right? You just want to fill the whole form in, and then at the bottom there's a button and you click save. Do your thing. Same thing here. These are 2 pieces of information that you can capture, press a button and go. Now, there might be a bit of confusion here, but this morning you had 2 buttons for the 2 inputs. What's the difference there? The difference, ladies and gentlemen, is that this morning's tutorial lecture, we entered a value to indicate how many numbers we want to add together and press the button to say, set up the program, because the second text box and the second button requires us to know how many numbers there are before we can operate the second button. Does this make sense? Do we need to first know the session only before we can indicate which week it is? Absolutely not. Does this make sense? Okay. You sure? There will be a quiz after this. You do know the semester test is around the corner. Who's surprised? Nobody. You know it's coming around the corner. Are you ready? No. Anyone who says yes is lying. Maybe some of you are like, I'm insulted. I believe I'm ready for your semester test. That just tells us challenge accepted. Ha ha ha. No. Okay. So there's my button. And I'm going to put in the button a label on itself. And it says, tell me when and where. You technically don't write such long captions on your button, but you know what I'm trying to get at. Okay, so that's going to be my user interface. And obviously you put your labels in. Now, let's go back to your variables. Who's finished with their variables? Or have you been all bedazzled by my awesome MS Paint skills? Anyone finish? Online people? Physical people? Okay, there's one hand there. They're like, right, okay, two hands, they're ready. Okay, so let's go back here and think of our variables. Now, as I've said before, generally the rule is for every input and for every output, you probably have a variable. Okay, so if this is the case, we probably have at least 4 different variables in place. Does this make sense? We've got a variable to store which session, we've got a variable to store which week, and then we've got a variable to store what time we're expecting you, and we've got a variable to store online or face-to-face for us. So if we do that, and we have our table, so we go variable, variable name, okay, so there's the name, and data type, what names are we going to have? Well, whatever you want to call them, as long as it makes sense to your marker. Because if your marker looks at that and says, you go A, B, C, D, what's wrong with this picture? Are these valid variable names? They are. They're actually valid. You can call your variables A, B, C, D. But as far as programming is concerned, are these good names to have? I mean, would you name your kids A, B, C, D? Why not? Your parents named you, like why don't you ask your parents, hey, do you have siblings? Who has siblings in this? Okay, wouldn't it be okay if your parents just said, you're number 1, and you're number 2, and you're and then like 3, 4, 5. What's wrong with that? It's not descriptive. Okay, so NT Mkwanazi is saying it's not descriptive. You can name your variables that way, but it's not descriptive, and that's true. Because you might also have terrible memory and you said A is for this now, but then, come Friday and you have to explain the code to your assistant, and your assistant goes, what is A? And you go, and then you got to think about it. You should be able to look at that variable and go, yes, that's for the session number. So, personally, I wouldn't name it A, B, C, D. I would maybe say session. I might name the other one week. And I would say the time and the venue. Okay, so let's say those are my options that I've got. In terms of data type, what would the data type be for session? Integer. All right, does this make sense? It's integer because it's the values 1 to 6. What would the data type for week be? String, because it's A or B. And the time, it would be string, all right, because remember, our restriction is we're only working with string, integer, double, or boolean. Which of those 4 best suit describing the time? String. Does this make sense? Okay. And the venue. Again, string. All right. Okay. So we've done inputs, we've done outputs, we've done our variables. Time is a string because we are going to describe, because we have a limited amount of variables. And I don't think we can represent time as an integer at this point. Okay. What else do we need to do? Well, it would be nice if we have test data, right? So what would one data set be? Let's say set 1. Input is obviously session, week, and then what should the time and venue be? Okay, so give me a random number, 1 to 6. 5. Let's make it 5. What is the week? Is it week A or B now? Let's make it A for now, all right? So if it is week A, session 5, what time would an individual pitch up if they were in session 5? Yes, we should be writing our algorithm first, okay? But I'm just giving you mentally we are thinking already, what should our test data be, okay? So, session 5, and it's week A. What time does a person pitch up if it is session 5? So let's quickly do a diagram here. I'm going to have to set a new one. New design, so I'm not going to save this picture, bye-bye picture. Okay, let's think of it this way. Let me use my brush. Okay, so as you know, there's sessions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And basically it's session 1, session 2, session 3, session 4, session 5, and session 6. As in 1, 3, 5 is pretty much group A, and 2, 4, 6 is technically group B. Does this make sense? Right. And in terms of time, these two, 1 and 2, are effectively session 1. 3 and 4 is effectively session 2. And 5 and 6 is the third session every Friday. Okay, so session 1 or 2, is going to be 1350. Right? And session 3 and 4 would rock up at 1530. And then session 3, which is 5 or 6, would be, and here I just said I make it up, it's 1700. Right. So, with this in mind, and I go back to my notepad with the test data. If it is session 1 or session 5, what time would the student have to pitch up at? 5 o'clock. You see that? I'm going to put in 5 o'clock there. Venue. Now remember, venue is labs or Discord. Would they be labs or would they be on Discord if it's week A? They would go to the labs. Does this make sense? Now, as we mentioned earlier this morning, it's not good enough for you to just have one set. You should have multiple data sets, because if you just test your program and this is the only test data you use, how do you know that you're testing your program properly? Does this make sense? You know why often people's programs don't work well enough? It's because they only use one set of test data, if at all. And they go, it worked for my one test. I said, that's great, but what about all the other possible values? So, would it be good for me to set a second set that's pretty much just that? Can I then just go, I'll test session 5 again? The only thing I do is I change week B, and I know obviously that it will be online instead, because if it's week B this week, and you're in session 5, it means you must go on Discord. Does this make sense? Now, is that sufficient? Is that enough test data for this kind of problem? Probably not. You want to test a few more other things, all right? But I'll leave that to you to do. Okay, so now let's move on. Yes. So honestly, we are not going to police how much test data you do. We just want to see at least more than one test set. But you're not really doing yourself a favor if you do it like this and then you go that's enough. Remember, the test data is actually there to help you. You want to test that your program is working perfectly for all possible inputs, all possible valid inputs. So when you come up with these things, you need to ask yourself, how much variation do I include in here in terms of the input so that I get the various possible outputs. So this is good in terms of it's telling me, it's giving me, this is what I expect. So this is you going, if I put the following inputs in, the correct answer should be this. That's what the test data is. So that when you implement your code and you run it, and then you have this test data in front of you, and you enter this input, and then you press the button, you should see the output should match the test data you've got. And if it doesn't, it means that there's something wrong in your design, or you've written the code and you've implemented correctly. Okay? All right. So let's now go to the really important part of the algorithm and implementation. And it's now actually 9 minutes to 2, so I got a bolt. Mr. van der Westhuizen is going to now take over and he's going to show you the implementation part. Thank you very much, Mr. van der Westhuizen. Okay, I'm going to disconnect. Online people, Mr. van der Westhuizen is still here. I unfortunately have to run to my meeting. Okay. And now Mr. van der Westhuizen is going to show you a completely different implementation from what I have.
Right, can the online students hear me? Right, okay, perfect. Right, so to make things easier, I've already created the design or just the interface while sitting there. It would help if you see the screen, I guess. Okay. So I've already created the interface that you'll be using. I'm assuming everybody is comfortable with that, or should I run through it? Stop. There we go. Right. Do I need to run through the design? How to get all the components there, how to rename them? You don't have to worry about that. So that outer box is just a panel, but we don't expect you to do that. Right. Right. So once again, I need some feedback here. Do you guys want me to show you how to put things onto the actual form and rename them, or are you guys comfortable with that? Everybody raise your right hand. Yes, I'm serious. Raise your right hand. Okay. If you want me to show you how to put the things on the form and rename them, leave your hand up. The rest can leave their hand down. Okay. Right. So I'll remove the button here and then we can, and the text box and the label, so we can look at that. So if you want to put items down, obviously you need your toolbox. So if you don't see your toolbox, just view your toolbox. Otherwise, the toolbox is generally highlighted on the side. So first of all, we want to put a label and a text box down for the venue that we're missing. So this is still following the design that Prof. Lung just did. I just already put some of the components down. So let's go and put the missing components down, which is a label over here and a text box. Very skinny text box. Right, and then we rename our label. So this one is for the venue, just to identify which venue you need to go to, whether it's online for Discord or the on campus. And then the text box, which we'll rename text box venue. Right, and then we're going to put our button down, the button that we'll use. It's at the same large button that Prof. Lung had. You cannot miss it. It's larger than life. And we'll just name this, I'm just going to name it submit. The text is when to come and where to go. Right. Everybody happy with that? Yes. All right, so that's a good question. So for the online people, the question was why, when renaming it, don't we put a .text after the name? So when you look at a text box, if you click on the text box and you see on this right-hand side, you've got the property panels that pop up and there's various options that you can select from. Now, all of these properties defines what that text box is. All right, so all of those properties define what the text box is. So you select one of them. In this case, we're just changing the name of the text box. We're just changing the property, the name property. The text option, if you scroll down for a text box, you'll see there is a text property. Now, the text property is the information that is inside the text box. So that's the information the user will see or input. So if you use the text property, that's that information. So in renaming it, we're just changing the property of the name. In code, when we're calling .text, we're telling the program we're either placing information inside that property or retrieving information from that specific property. Right. So that's a good question. It's good to think about things like that. Right. So we've got our interface. So now we can start with our code. So let's see if I can still code VB. It's been a while. So what are the first things we need to do? You can tell me, what's the first thing you do when you open up your Visual Studios and you open up your program? Your option statements. So you can tell me, what are your option statements? So we've got option strict on. I can spell strict today. Option explicit. On off. Okay, and the last one? You can remember it, option infer. Off. Right. So what's the next step? We have our design. We know what our inputs and our outputs are. So what's the next step? We're declaring our global variables. Right. Why do we declare our global variables first? Yes. The computer needs to know what to work with. Also, because they are global, it's good to have them at the top. So you can already see when starting the program. Let's say someone else needs to read your program. These are the variables that can be used throughout the entire program. Regardless of what subroutine or function or class you're using, it can be used throughout your program. So it's good to have that there. Right. So we have 4 variables. Yes. Is that not in your lecture slides? It's not. Okay. We'll look at that after the program. I'll tell you. Otherwise, I'll let Prof. Lung tell you what it means. I can't remember exactly right now. If I remember correctly, upfront infer refers to the specific variable declaration that you're using. But instead of giving you the wrong information, I'll just show you in a moment. There's a place where you can go to find that information as well. But first things first, when we do our declaration, what 4 variables do we need? Session, week, time, and venue. All right. So we can go and create those quickly. So we've got our session, private, yes. What do you mean outside the event? Am I making a mistake here? Okay, so one person picks up on that. You can tell me what's going on. You guys can see clearly. Why is it giving me an issue here? What did I do wrong here? Okay, so I'm declaring a variable inside a subroutine. Generally, that's not an issue if we're using dim. But I'm trying to declare a global variable. Where do we do that? Directly below our class definition. Yes? Right. So it goes over there. Biggest way to, or the easiest way to see that is it will highlight it in red. If you don't know what's going on, just look at it. If you highlight it, it will tell you what the issue is most of the times. Not always, but most of the times. All right. So we'll delete that. So we've got private session. This was an integer, right? Right. Quickly list the others for me. Which was the others? Okay, as. All right, the other one. Time as. Okay, and the last one. String. Perfect. So now we have our next. What do we want to do next? Let's go to the online view. What do you want to do? Can you actually see my screen? Is it showing? Okay, there it pops up. What's the next step? Now that we've declared our global variables, what's the next step? Yeah, I removed the subroutine, but we'll add it back. I guess the delay doesn't help that much. Come on, the rest of the class is waiting in anticipation. It's a competition. Who's going to get the answer first? All right. So we have our global variables. Let's go back to our form. We have our text boxes for our input and our output. We've got our labels. We've got our button. What's the next logical process? What do we need to do? We need to submit our information and then test it, right? Yes. Come on, guys. Yes, no? Right, so how do we get the subroutine back? You double click on it. Now, what's the first thing we do? We need to test our session and we need to test our week, right? How do we do that? What do we need to do first before we can start the test? Can I go if session whatever and compare it? Can I do that right now? Why not? Because session hasn't been assigned a value yet. I need to assign it a value. Right. So session will be equal to txt. Well, I didn't actually show you the name, but it's txt session. And will that work? Why not? So txt session refers to, like I mentioned previously, txt refers to everything in here, all the properties. So you have to identify the specific property you're interested in. And in this case, we're interested in the text property so that we can retrieve the information that the user has given your program. So the text. But it still highlights as an issue. You can tell me why. No, you've answered. Come on. Come on. I'm going to start choosing people at random. You've already answered a few times. The online people, who's going to be first? Conversion, yes. So session is a integer. Text is a string. So I need to convert it first. How do I do that? Yes, you guys are catching up. I know, Prof. Lung said you guys are quiet. Let's see if that's correct. Let's hope it is not that way. Right, so we've got the session. What is the next one we need? The week. Yes? Okay, so we get the week, and the week is a string, so we don't need to convert that. I think I called it week. We'll check now. Yeah, all right. So now we need to do our check. We've got our two variables. We've got session, we've got session, and we've got week. Now we can go and test our information. So how do we do that? What do we need to check first? Are we going to check the week first, or are we going to check the session first? Okay, so hands up if you say we check the session first. Hands up if you say we check the week first. Hands up if you say it doesn't matter. Right, so it comes down to personal preference, because regardless of which one you choose, you're going to have to check the other one as well in any case. So let's do a quick vote. If you want me to do the session first, hand up. If you want me to do the week first, hand up. Okay, we've got a bit more life. Right, so in this case, we're testing our week. So we've got week is equal to, what are our two week values? It's A or B, correct? So we're testing to see, this is not Java. We're testing to see whether it's week A, and then testing something, or whether it's week B, correct? Right, now, have you done the else if statement yet? So would you do this? Or would you rather do what? Or would you rather do that? Which one is more correct? Or so there's three variations. We've got if week A equals to or if week equals to A, and if if week equals to B in if, or if week A, else if week B, or if week A, else the other option. Which one is more correct? Is any one of those three more correct than the other? No, they will all three do the same thing. It just depends on which one you're more comfortable with. In this case, I think because you're still starting out, let's stick to the easier versions. So we can either do, you've done an else if, right? Okay, we'll stick with the else if then. So we've got our week A else if. So we've got if week A, then code to follow, and else if week B, code to follow. So we're happy with that. What's the next step? What is the next step? You need to test the session. Now, the same thing for the session, there are various ways which we can do that. You can check the session 3 times in a row. So if, you can check these sessions, if, else, actually you need 2 else ifs, but, or you can go, you haven't done a select, have you? Okay, so we won't go that far. Right, so we test session, and what are we checking? What do we have to check for week A? Do you have to check all 6 sessions? Yes, no? Oh. All right, so let's do this the long way first. So if session 1, what does that mean? So if we go to our table, we've got week A session 1, that is online or campus? Campus. If you're in session A, well, week A session 1, and it is week A, where are you supposed to be? On campus, which means your venue equals campus. Yes? All right. What is our time? Any ideas? It's the first one, right? All right. Everybody happy with that one? Yes? No? Okay. Now, we can either do another if and continue with this if every single time. Would you prefer to do an if statement every single time or an else if? Why an else if? Why an else if over an end if or a new if statement? Anyone care to guess? Stop that. Oh, I broke it, that's why. Why do you do this to me? End if. It will fix itself now. We just need to give it some conditions. Why would you prefer doing it this way compared to writing it out 6 times? Who would care to guess? Why is it less redundant? Not just readability, it actually helps with execution as well. So a small program like this, it doesn't affect the program that much. But consider you have to test a few thousand people. For every single person that executes that statement 6 times. if you're in week A, session 1, is it necessary to check all the other sessions? No. So if you do an else if, it checks the first one. If it's that first one, it skips the rest. But if you do an if statement for each individual section, it's going to check every single one of them, even if it was the top one. So this is a bit easier for the machine, essentially. Sorry, spacing and alignment annoys me. Okay, so session 2 would be online, and the time would be 13:50. You all remember that graph Proflin showed you, right? So I'm just basically using that graph's information now. All right, so the next one is session 3. Copy and paste is not your friend. Session 3 starts 13:50. Sorry, 15:30. Okay, let me just copy that quickly. For online, session 5 would be campus. Time would be 17:20. All right. So there we have our if statements. We're checking that should be online. So week 1, session 1, 3, and 5, you're doing campus and then your time. Session 2, 4, and 6, you're online and your time. Everybody happy with that? No issues, right? Yes? No? Say that again? Yeah? That's a good question. And we'll play through that logic in a moment. So, what's the current week? Week A. If you're in session 1, where do you go? Campus, right? Okay. It's still week A, right? If you're in session 2, where do you go? How do you know that? Because you tested the logic. Now, let's say we remove 2, 4, and 6. If I tell you it's week A, your session 2, where do you go? So the week is A or B. So we're testing week A and week B. So that's the week in which you alternate, essentially. Your session dictates which one you're going to, whether you're online or on campus in week A or week B. So you need to check which week it is, and then the session will tell you if you're online or campus. But your session time will stay the same. All right. Right, and then we test out week B. So week B is basically just a copy of week A. Are we going to type it out or copy paste? Okay, type it out, we will do. All right, so we've got session session 1. And then if session 1, it's going to be venue, which we'll type in a second, and then time, which we'll type in a second. Right. And then that is not a number, that is a string. This time, I'm going to do 6 if statements. So instead of doing an if else, I'm going to do if statements so that you can see that they both work. I think that's enough. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if it is week B, you're in session 1, what is your venue? Online. Okay. Basically just the inverse of what we had on top. It does become a little bit redundant, repetitive, but unfortunately there is no way around that. And then campus, just quickly going to type these out. How easy is it to make a mistake here? How easy is it to make a mistake here? Come on. Is it easy to make a mistake with what we're doing right now? Why? Why yes? Why yes? Why is it easy to make a mistake with what we're doing right now? Well, everything is together, yes. We're typing it out in a way that makes it readable, so that's not really the main concern. How many if statements do we have? So we've got 6 in the first one and 6 in the second one, and then the 2 main ones, right? So we've got about 14 if statements. How easily can you make a mistake if you copy and paste? Let's say I made a mistake with the first if statement, the one I copied. And instead of having session 1, I test session 2, and then I copy that all across, but I forget to change it. Does that make things more difficult? Why? Because you're copying your mistake across. Now, what you're doing right now, even just typing it out, it's easy to make a small logic mistake. It's easy to accidentally type session 5 or session 6, or type the wrong name, or type the wrong venue. It's quite easy to do that. It's one of the reasons why test data is so important, because test data allows you to check the various logic points. So instead of having to read your own code, because when you read your own code, you read what you think you typed. You don't actually read what you typed. That's the problem with you trying to analyze your own code. You're reading what you think you typed. The test data allows you to test the logic of your programs against the logic what it should be. Right. So yay test data. Yay test data. Yay. The enthusiasm here is, yeah, okay. Right. So we do our if statements, we do our checks. Are we done? Are we finished? What do we still need to do? What do we still need to do? We've done all of our checks. All of our checks are there. We're happy that they should work, or we're confident that they should work. What's the next step? What's the next step? Output. Because it's there, but now we need to tell the user, here's the information you wanted. So we have the input stuff here. We have the checks that we've done. We've set the values to what it should be. We just need to push it back to the user now. Where do we do that? Why outside the if statements? Because can I do it here? If I go txt venue equals venue, and then txt time equals time. Dot text. Don't forget the dot text. Can I do that inside every single if statement? Can I do that? Yes, I can do that. Is it good? No. Why? Because you're repeating the same thing. So literally those two lines will be repeated in every single if statement. That's not good. Do you agree with me? All right. So where can I place these two lines? So that they only have to be executed once. Outside the last if statement check, correct? Right. So we've got session A, we've got session B, or we've got week A, week B, and then session 1 to 6. And then outside our last if statement is where we can place that spec output code. Do you all agree with me? Yes? No? We're going to have fun next year. Actually, next semester. I like feedback. You're not behind the screen anymore. You can't just go. At this point, I would even appreciate that if it's just sitting there like, he can't see me. If I stay still enough, he won't see me. Doesn't work that way. So let's run it and see what happens. Who thinks it will work? Oh, 2 people, 3, 4 people, 5 people, 6 people. 6 people out of the venue. It broke. So what's wrong? Who saw the mistake? All right. So we say no, and we go to our code. Form 1 is not declared. Oh, this mistake. All right. This is probably a mistake you won't really see. In this case, I renamed the form, and it didn't save that information. And now I can't remember what I renamed it to. Hopefully you won't get this issue. Okay. That should fix my issue. All right. So it executes. Just because I see this doesn't mean it's working. No. So let's go and test it. Session 1, group 1. If I click on the button, let's call this our test case. Session 1, group 1, sorry, session 1, week A. Where are they supposed to go? On campus and time? The 1 o'clock-ish one. All right. So we're happy that works. So let's check session 2. Where should they go? They should be online. Okay, they are. Session 3, where should they go? Campus. Okay. And then session 4, you'll see is online. Session 5, campus. Session 6, online. Awesome, it works. Is that sufficient for my test data? Why not? We only tested week A. We didn't test week B. Don't make that mistake. It happens a lot. Where you think, okay, I'm copying my test data over, changing one value that changes the output. We're golden. I've got enough test data. It's not always enough if you don't execute the various if statements. It seems silly now, but believe me, when your program starts growing, you're going to be very thankful for test data. Because it's small mistakes that cause issues. Right. So So let's start it from session 1. So week B, session 1, they should be online. There's some more life here. Then 2, campus. 3, you've got online. 4, you've got campus. 5, you've got online. And then 6 should be campus, right? All right, it worked. Everybody okay with this? Is there anything in this code set? So let's just close this. Is there anything with these if statements that confuse you? Something you want me to go over again? Sorry? I can't hear. Else if. Okay, we'll cover that again in a second. Anything else? Well, this should be on Eve. What? What should be on Eve? Did I miss something? All right. So when we look at else if, so like I said, an if statement checks one condition, right? So you've got if condition, then if that condition is true. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. That's a good question. So what happens if the user inserts something that is incorrect, that we are not testing for? So let's say week A, session 7, what do you think is going to happen? Any ideas? What do you think is going to happen? All right, so hands up if you think it's going to break the program. If you think it's going to make the program stop working, hands up. If you think nothing's going to happen, hands up. All right? And if you're unsure, hands up. It's more than valid to be unsure in this case. Now, think about it very carefully. Our program tests our input. We grab our information from our text file. We compare that to a few conditions, and then if certain conditions are true, we have an output, correct? Right. So let's say none of the conditions are true. What do you think should happen? What do you think should happen? In an ideal world, let's say this is a program for you to use for your sessions. If you type in an incorrect week or an incorrect session, what do you think should happen? It should return an error message to tell you something went wrong. Okay. But in our program, do we tell it to do any errors? No. But do we tell it to do anything with other information? No. So if I click on the button, nothing is going to happen. Why? Because we're only checking true conditions. We're not checking whether it's wrong. There is a way to do that. I don't know if I should show you. Have you seen message boxes yet? Some of you saying yes. Have you seen a message box yet? All right. So let's say you're checking whether a condition or whether something went wrong. This is where the else if comes into place. If week A is true, do something for week A. Else if week B. Now, this, what I'm going to do right now, only works if you do an else if. Because if it's not week A and it's not week B, what is it? If it's not week A and it's not week B, what is it? It's the wrong information, right? So you provided the wrong week. So you can go message box and then just say wrong week provided. Right. So if you run that, just to show you. So we select a valid session, but we select a wrong week. So let's go week F. You click on it, it tells you a wrong week was selected. Don't take a photo of my code. It's recorded. Come on. So it's telling me the wrong week was selected. So we know that would work. Now, let's take a valid week, but an incorrect session. What do you think is going to happen? Why nothing? I click on it, nothing happens. Because my condition to check for something alternative to what is provided is only for week A and week B. If I want to do the same thing for the sessions, I will have to use the else if statements and then put an additional condition that if it's not one of these that we've already tested, it is something that is wrong. All right. Prof. Lung's going to probably kill me for showing you that, but that's okay. Everybody happy with that? So when we look at an if statement, the if statement at its default is if condition to be checked, then the true statement is being tested. Then you've got an else. An else is executed on when that condition is false. An else if executes on the first condition that is false, but then does an additional check. That additional check can either be true or false. So it will keep on going down the else if until you reach your true condition and then execute that code. That allows you to do these checks for, you provided something that we're not checking for, there is a mistake. Opposed to you only assuming that the user will give you the correct information, then you can just do if statements. If statement, if statement, if statement. It will execute all of the if statements, but one of them will be correct. All right. A lot of you seem a little lost now. Are you guys okay? Do you understand that? Right. Did I address? I know someone asked. Okay. Right. That is, we've got 3 more minutes left. So do you want me to show you something in 3 minutes? I'll show you how I close the session. So that's it for today, and the person leaves. Give you a message box. Yes, that's correct, but you're not here to hear that, I guess. All right, so that's it for today. I hope that helped. I hope you have a little bit of a better understanding of an if statement. One thing to take away from this, you saw me do various if statements, right? You will probably have questions about, can I do this? What will happen if I do this? What do you think is the answer to that question? I do this to all the second years and all my postgrads as well. If you ask me, can I do this or is this possible? What do you think our answer should be? Have you tried it? There's an easy way to answer those questions. Can I use this code? Execute it and see if you can. If it doesn't work, you can come and ask us. I tried using this, it doesn't work. Why? We'll gladly explain it to you. But don't come to us and be like, I saw this line of code in your lecture slides. What does it do? The first thing you're going to be asked is, have you tried it? Have you looked at what gets executed or what happens when you execute that code? If your answer is no, we're going to tell you, go and try it. If it doesn't work, or if it does work and you don't know why, come back. Then we can explain to you what's going on. Having seen the execution yourself, you'll have a better understanding of what we're going to tell you. So with all things in life, practice makes perfect. If you don't practice your code, you won't be able to do these solutions. All right. Motto of the day. Practice makes perfect. Okay, I'll see you guys next semester.